Hey folks, welcome back to another review with yours truly, Sam Healey. Today we're taking a look at They Come Unseen. This is a submarine warfare game put out by Osprey Games, and it's designed by Commander Andy Benford. Now, why would he be calling himself Commander Andy Benford? Because he was actually a submarine commander. So this is a game designed about submarine warfare from somebody who knows what he's talking about. So that's a pretty cool thing. I like it when game designers have those kinds of backgrounds. So let's go ahead and get down to the table. I'll show you how it works, and we'll come back with some final thoughts after that. Let's hit it. And so here I have a game of They Come Unseen set up for you, and basically the gist of the entire game is that the two NATO subs are trying to destroy 4 of the 6 Russian bases designated Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot. That's one of the ways that the game can end. The other way that the game can end is if the destroyers, Russian destroyers here, are able to destroy both of the NATO subs. You also have a Russian logistical fleet that starts the game here at Echo Base, and this is where also their extra supplies are, more ammunition and more fuel. Now for the NATO submarines, this is a hidden movement game, which will take place largely behind this screen. I'll show you what goes on behind that in just a few moments, but for simplicity's sake, we're going to be moving some of these things here on the actual board. Just realize that this would actually be taken care of behind the screen and not actually out here on the board. The Russians, however, do move all of their stuff here on the board, and they're able to do sonar passes and sonar watches, and we'll use that as well. So basically, during the course of the game, you're going to have the Russians using their destroyers to hunt the submarines, using their logistical fleet here to move their containers and their supplies out to these different bases, because if you destroy some of these bases, you're going to destroy all of the fuel or ammunition that's at Echo Base. And so you do have to be careful there as the Russian player. So the 2 Russian destroyers start with 100% fuel and 3 salvos. 1 salvo equals 6 cubes. So if you take 1 shot, you're going to be able to drop these 6 cubes onto the board. So once you use all 6 of those cubes once, you would click down for the salvo. And then once you get down to 0, you would have to resupply. Each one of these little container tokens equals 2 more salvos. The fuel consumption for the ships is denoted down here at the bottom of the screen. So if you move 4 spaces, you're going to be using 10 units of fuel. But if you go 5 to 8, then you're going to be using 15 units of oil, and then 9 to 12, you're using 20 units, and so forth and so on. Now, the NATO subs move a little bit different. They don't actually use fuel. They use batteries to conduct their movement. So every square that you move is going to make you click down 1 battery unit, so to speak. But you do have a snorting action, which means that you can recharge. You have to come up to periscope depth, and then you have to recharge your batteries using your diesel generators. And then each square that you move allows you to go down 1 click on your depth. So from 1 space, you can go down to 200 depth, and then another space you go down to 400 if you have the ability to. If you notice out here, there's certain areas of the board that are different shades of blue, and they have different depths attributed to them. So here you could only go down to 200. Here you could be at 200 or 400, and whereas here in the deep sections you can go to 6, 4, or 200. You also have some weather tokens out here. You can choose to use or not use the weather rules. Basically, weather rules makes it more difficult for the Russian players to navigate the rougher waters that the storms are causing in the Barents Sea. Now, of course, the game is played in a number of rounds until the in-game conditions are met. Either the destroyers have obliterated the 2 NATO submarines, or until the submarines have destroyed the 4 bases that they are looking to destroy. The NATO submarines will actually move first, and of course movement is taken care of behind the screen. And then after they are done doing their turn, then the Russian players will be able to move both of their destroyers and move their logistical fleet whichever way they would want to. Now, as far as movement for the submarines is concerned, the submarines can move up to 14 squares. And they can move orthogonally or diagonally, it doesn't matter. But as we said earlier, every square that they move, they do have to click down on their battery. If they get down to 0, they have to surrender their entire turn, and they only get 5 units back. So you really don't want to run out of battery. You want to make sure you're using that snort action, and I'll explain that in just a few moments. You can also lay mines. Each submarine is given some auditory mines that they can lay out there. Of course, they'll be done on their field here, but it'll take up 5 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on their sheet, which is smaller than this one, which is why these don't fit on the 5 here. But when you lay a mine, whenever somebody crosses going at a certain speed, then they'll detonate, cause damage to the destroyers, or absolutely obliterate one of the supply ships. Another action that they can do is to show up at a base, load off their saboteurs, and then destroy the base there. And of course, they can only attack bases which they have drawn at the beginning of the game. There are 6 base cards, and you are able to draw 4 of them randomly, putting the other in the box, and those are the only bases that you can destroy during the course of the game. Now, I mentioned snorting earlier. What that simply means is that you're going to be at a certain depth. First of all, in order to snort, you have to be at periscope depth, which is at 0, which means you are basically on the surface, and the Russian players will be able to denote with their datum tokens where you are. But you will have to, during the course of your movement, move 2 in a straight line, which simply means you're traveling at periscope depth, you're using your diesel generators to recharge your batteries. That will give you 10 units of battery life. And then after you've done that, so he started snorting here, he went 1, 2, and now he will be able to move 3 in any direction, including diagonally. And as per usual, with each square you move, you can change depth to the depth that is allowed. On the Russians' turn, they would be able to move their ships, and during their movement, they can perform sonar searches, attacks, they can ram the submarines, and then at the end of their movement, they can actually set for sonar watch, which we'll explain all of that in just a few moments. Now, the destroyers here can move a maximum of 18 squares in any direction during the course of their turn, and they can break that movement up. So let's say on the Russian player's turn here, the red destroyer, they want to move that as far out there as possible to try to start controlling the sonar down in this area here. So they're going to go ahead and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Let's just say that they stop right there. Now, what they'll be able to do, they've moved their full 18, which means they're going to take 35% of fuel. So that's all the way down to 65 there. And then they're going to be able to set a sonar watch, which means that they can take these 2 plastic things here and line them up at the front of their ship, like so. If the submarines are moving through any of these areas here, they will have to announce contact purple, or contact red, or contact yellow, or contact green. Now, you'll notice here that down the middle, there is this trench where there is no sonar. And that's a way for the submarines to kind of hide from the sonar. You can actually be underneath the ship, directly in front of it or directly behind it, and it won't affect your sonar pinging. Now, let's say that this happened in the middle of their search, and this is actually a search and not a watch. They could say, we're doing a sonar search, and if, one of these guys is actually in one of those areas, the submarine player will have to say contact red. So at that point, they could make an attack, which means that they can put out these 6 cubes onto this grid pattern here and determine what depth each of them are at. So for example, he could do something like this and then something like that. And then he could say the white is at 200 feet and the the blacks are at 400 feet. If the location of the cube and the depth both match where the submarine is, they'll take a direct hit. If the location matches, but it's only 200 feet off in either direction, then they'll take an orange hit. But if either one of those is missing, for example, let's say that they were at 600 and this was at 200, then they would be an absolute miss. You have to be within 200 meters to actually get that near miss. Also on the Russians' turn, they have the opportunity to move their logistical fleet around, realizing that before they leave Echo Base, they can load up their holds, and we want to try to move these things out. Now, container ships, which are these two guys right here, the purple and the green one, they can move up to 14 squares on their turn, and then the supply ship can move up to 16 squares on their turn. Again, that would be affected by weather, should you choose to use those weather things as well. Your destroyers can resupply by going to one of these bases and simply picking up and doing that. But you could also resupply at sea by coming alongside. So for example, let's say this guy still had his stuff there. This ship could come up alongside it and resupply at sea. You can also have both of your destroyers resupply from the same ship like so, but it just depends on how you're able to do that. But you can resupply at sea during your logistical action, or you can resupply at a base during your actual movement. And so basically, from the NATO player's perspective, this is what you're pretty much going to be looking like. So for example, let's say that on your first turn, you just kind of kept it quiet. You can only move 6 spaces in 250 anyway, because you got to run slow. So you can't do your full movement. So let's just say you went ahead and did something like this, and maybe this person was a little bit more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that on your first turn. So now starting, you've used 6 units of battery on your last turn, and you moved down to 200 depth and stayed there because that's as deep as you can go in these shallow waters. But now on this turn, you have a little bit more freedom. For example, maybe the blue NATO ship, they're going to stay pretty much where they are because, frankly, Alpha is one of the bases that we're trying to destroy. So we want to see if we can sneak in there and go ahead and take it out. Alpha will destroy all fuel containers at Ice Station Echo. So maybe we want to do a quick strike there. Don't know. We'll have to see. But maybe this time we want to be a little bit sneaky and we'll just move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 this way and kind of stay right there. That will use 6 more of our battery, taking us down to 8. And we're staying at 200, so that didn't actually change anything there. But let's say that green is a little bit, has a little bit more to think about here. We're still only going to be able to move 6 because we can. We're starting here in 250. But maybe we want to open our options for later on and go into that deeper water. So we'll move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 like this. And as we're moving, we can actually go down another level here because we're in the deeper water. So now we're at 400 and we're heading towards that Alpha base maybe, or maybe just trying to sneak through here and get at one of these other bases that are open like Delta. Delta is also going to affect their fuel, so maybe we'll send one against Alpha, one against Delta. So that's that for They Come Unseen from Osprey Games. Now I have to admit that when I first got this in, I was like, wow, this is going to be really convoluted. This is going to be really technical. I mean, it's designed by a former submarine commander. He's going to want to pull out all of the little tidbitty details about submarine combat and all this. It actually didn't do that. It's fairly well abstracted. And, you know, generally speaking, for me, that would be kind of a bad thing because I do like some of those thematic elements and I want to see all of those different things at work. But it's really not that way. I like the abstracted nature of this, you know, the way you take care of fuel, the way the Russians have to move their logistical fleets and that type of thing. That could be a really technical thing, but it didn't happen that way. The designer really kept things almost in a pretty streamlined format right off the get-go. So I like that, and that's actually going to be my first pro of the game, is that what could have been a very technically driven game actually isn't. And it decided to keep the theme fun and not bog it down with all of these charts and all of this kind of stuff. The only charts that are really in the game are the ones that have to do with how far you move and how much fuel you use. And really, that's only on the Russians' part. It's really simple on the NATO side because one square takes one battery point, and you have 20 to work with at the start of the game. And then you have to refill those by doing this little thing over here, snorting, which, by the way, is a really funny name for it. We got a kick out of that, calling it snorting. I'm going to go snort, you know, that type of stuff. I just thought it was interesting. But it's a neat, streamlined experience that could have been a technical monster, and they chose not to do it. I like that. The second pro that I have for the game is that it seems to me like both sides are very well balanced, but you also have your special abilities, so to speak, for each one. Special ability of the submarines, of course, is your hidden movement. You really can be very sneaky with how you move around the board, and that makes it kind of difficult for the destroyers. But at the same time, the destroyers have their logistical fleet. They can actually use them as like, you go over there, see if there's a minefield. Now, of course, they probably wouldn't do that in real life, maybe, but you can do that. It is just a game. So you can do that. You can... you have a wider range of movement. You have those sonar searches and watches where you can pretty much lock down parts of the board that the submarine captains aren't going to want to move through because they don't want to give up their position. So those special abilities that they have really help balance everything out. You both feel powerful, but at the same time, you both feel like you need to be very careful because at any moment they could blow up one of those bases and there go all of our weapons. And so we have to be very careful with what we have right now. Each destroyer only starts with 3 salvos. And if you grind through all of those just making pot shots, well, you're going to run out of ammo pretty quick, right? Especially after some of those bases get blown up. So I like the balance that this game has. My third pro of the game is the component quality in a general sense. Nothing really stands out and goes, wow, this is amazing. But at the same time, it's not bad either. Some of these tokens, yeah, I wish they could have possibly been a little bit thicker. But these are really useful, these little sonar things that were plastic. The only thing here, though, is I wish they would have had these same kinds, just smaller, for behind the screen, because that's where you really kind of need to see where you can go and not go. Now, I can see how this could possibly be blinged out a little bit with using, like, you know, micro machines, submarines, or something to that effect. I don't even know if those exist, but I'm sure they probably do somewhere. But generally speaking, this is not bad component quality, and I wanted to use that as a pro for this one because I was not disappointed. Now, as far as my cons for the game are concerned, there are very few of them. Actually, not very many at all. The one I'm really going to mention, though, is the fact that if you're playing with somebody who struggles with analysis paralysis, you probably don't want to pull this game out. It does suffer. It's the kind of game that people will want to say, okay, it's our turn to move, especially as the Russian players. It's our turn to move. We can narrow down exactly, or at least a few different spots where the submarine can be. We just have to know, okay, well, he moved. He can only move 6 in the 250. So, and they can take forever to try to map out exactly where that submarine is. And I'm not saying that in real life you probably wouldn't be doing that. I'm not saying that at all. You probably would be doing that because you want to find out exactly where that guy is. You don't want to take pot shots and waste your ammo and so forth and so on. But in a game, that really can just mess. I've watched people play games like Fury of Dracula or that one about Jack the Ripper. I can't remember the Letters from Whitechapel, and where they play each round, and they have a yellow notepad out, and they're taking notes. Well, he could be here, and he could be here, and he could be here. Oh, please. I just won't play this kind of game with that kind of player because for me it just kind of saps the fun out of the game for it. Now for them that's exactly what makes the game fun for them, and that's great. That's fine. I just don't want to play that kind of game. So analysis paralysis is prevalent in this game. So if you have players in your group that are prone to do that, unless you're willing to just kind of block out a bunch of time and just hunker down and do it, I'd probably steer clear with your analysis paralysis people with this game because it can really lean heavily in that direction. So really that's about that for They Come Unseen. I really did enjoy everything about the game. There wasn't anything that disturbed me or had me take a step back or anything like that. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I really did enjoy it. It probably won't be hitting the table that often because there is probably a smaller group of people that will be even interested in playing a game like this, but at the same time, I won't be disappointed if it does hit the table again because I did enjoy it. I like hidden movement games, and I also like the other side of it, especially with this, because it's not only about hunting down, you also have to move your logistical fleet around as well, being the Russian players. So that's that. 7 out of 10 for They Come Unseen. Thanks for joining me. I certainly appreciate it. We'll see you guys and gals on the flip side. Take care.